Welcome, everybody. Hope you're
Hi,
having
I'm
a
Snub.
great day.
Nice to
Yeah.
meet you all.
And now I've become Sab. It's funny
And
how that works.
I'm Jasper / Gix. My name did not get swapped.
Yes. Did I get enough sleep? That is a good question. Let me tell you a bit of a story. This is what's happened to me. Last night, we said one more pull, and then we killed Sarah CM. And then I proceeded to do over an hour of podcast with the great, the lovely Rava. Then I stayed on the stream a little bit while longer and hit like 13 hours. Then I had extreme gastrointestinal distress for another 3 hours after that. So I was up very late into the night with immense suffering. But you know what? Here we are. Yeah. I made a horrible mistake. I wanted to go to this like burger place, and I drove there, and it was closed. Like, what? It was horrible. And then I had to go to the next best thing because my stream was still running. And it turns out that the next best thing just happens to be the closest McDonald's. So that, interpret that how you will, but I think it destroyed my system. Here we are, right? Anyways, we're here to talk about the raid ecosystem in Guild Wars 2. We've got a whole bunch of powerful raid minds in this podcast today. Of course, we have Gix, aka Jasper, runs acceleration, helps people get into raids. Sab does something kind of similar with the Gamer Haven. They have some statics. They do a lot of like on-demand training and those sorts of things. They help people get into endgame content as a big community. And then, of course, I run the Skane Gang, which is the premier place to find a bunch of random people and progress through raids and strikes and fractals as a static group. There are 140 statics now there. So within this call, we have quite a few people that know quite a bit about raids. And it's funny because we kind of point to each other quite a bit when we're dealing with different people looking for specific things. So I figure we'll just kind of start off by, how you guys doing? And what do you think about raids nowadays? What's going on in the raid community?
First thought in my head is how many trainings do you think the three of us have done combined? If you had to put a number on it. Because I can tell you, for me,
Oh boy.
I'm up to about probably about 2,000 or 3,000.
It's innumerable, incalculable. It's a lot. Yeah.
I think I'm in the hundreds. Maybe like mid hundreds, like 400 or 500. But my raids tend to not be they are much more clean nowadays, but when I started, they were not as clean. I remember having a 5-hour statue and 5-hour Zera on Wing 3, and that was what inspired me to make better explanations for those fights, because that took way too long.
What a comment. So Gomez. So the three people keeping North American raiding alive.
Yeah, you hear that sometimes. Sometimes people message me and they say, literally, if you guys didn't exist, I would have quit the game like a year or two ago, which is very flattering. But I think it also exposes there are some pretty particular problems with how people get into raids in Guild Wars 2, or how people perceive raids, or what the general community says. And that's a little bit, maybe a little bit scary. I, for one, think that my kind of mantra about raiding isn't actually that hard. The hardest thing about raids is finding 9 other people who will stick by you and allow you to play the game and allow you to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And when you think about it, within the game, there's really not a lot of opportunity to find other players who are at that phase in their raiding journey.
So I want to address this actually. This is something I want to say super quick, is that I actually started XL because of a similar reason to the whole, like, oh, you guys are saving NA rating, you guys are all that. I started rating a few years ago, and it was way easier than I thought, because it is easier than most people think. And so that's why I started XL, is because I'm like, man, if I just explain these fights well enough and just say like, hey, this is the bare minimum you need to do, you can probably do it. And it worked. And obviously it's way more tense than a raid where everyone is playing good builds. And people usually self-correct over time, but it's so funny to me that people are like, oh, you guys are the best, you guys are doing everything, and I put in not as much work as you guys, but you guys are putting in tremendous amounts of work. I don't want to discourage that at all, or disparage rather, I'm using the wrong words. But most people just need a push. They just need to be told, hey, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to have on, this is where you need to stand when this happens. And they can do it. And if they just looked up like a guide and they did it with their friends, the result might be similar, where they're just like, oh, we died because of this. That's what the guide says. And so it's bizarre to me that to this day, and it's happened the entire time I've ran XL, people are like, oh, you're so good for doing this. And I'm like, I'm literally just, if you read a guide and got with friends, this would be the same result. At least for XL, because XL is beginners, like exclusively almost to start. So I don't know if you guys have similar experiences where you're like, man, this guy was so afraid of raiding, and now he is hitting 30k DPS like 2 days into refining his character because he was just like doing it way wrong. But
If I can follow up on that, you just described me. I saw a name in chat, so I don't know if they were saying anything, but I like to scroll the members list. I don't like viewer counts, but I like scrolling the names to see if there's people I recognize. And I saw the name Prude, and that name stood out to me because that's someone who actually taught an IRL friend of mine to raid, and that IRL friend of mine got the confidence to start pulling me into other groups. And my very first raid experience ever was at a time when alacrity and quickness were not boons, they were just a unique buff that only Chronomancer could give. I love Mesmer. I happened to build out the Chrono traits. I didn't know what builds were. I didn't know any of these websites. And he brings me, hey, come join this group. I'm like, yeah, sure. Well, as a Chrono, they automatically assumed I was going to be doing alacrity and quickness and still do like 15k DPS. I didn't know this. And 2 or 3 pulls in, I'm getting flamed, I'm getting PM'd, I'm getting called trash. They told me don't join this group. A couple of them blocked me, and that caused me to quit the game. It was like a pretty traumatic experience, if you will, and I was like, wow, raiding is toxic, this is terrible. I don't ever want to do this. So I went from having absolutely no idea how to play the game or even how to learn to play the game. And then fast forward 7 years, I just made my own group and was like, who wants to figure this out with me? And who wants to learn this with me? And here we are today. So yeah, I was the guy doing no damage that got kicked, inflamed, and blocked. And
here's where Sneb comes in, and Sneb's like,
Yeah.
oh, I've always been doing 40k. I don't know what your guys' problem was. I've never been kicked out of a group.
I for the first 7 years the game was out, I played core engineer and ran around with grenades only. I was an only grenade gamer. I only threw grenades. Grenade kit only. And that got me very far. But then I went into raids and somebody told me to unalive myself. And it changed. And it changed my trajectory.
I can't do that. I can't damage myself with them.
Yeah, I was like, whoa. Yeah, it's really interesting hearing people talk about how the raid scene is really toxic now because you haven't seen anything.
It's gotten way better.
It's really tame, especially on NA. On NA, if you're one of those really elite players, you just don't ever use the LFG or anything. So the notion that raids are really toxic now, I don't really think that's the case. I think it's a pretty big myth. But I too, when I started, I learned the Hollowsmith build. I used to jump from stream to stream. This is before I really streamed. I remember there was a person named Rayo. He does a lot of RuneScape content now, but he's a former ArenaNet partner. And he was playing Hollow. And so I would watch him and I would ask him all these questions, to the point where it was slightly annoying. And then I would go to people like Angels and I'd say, hey, can you tell me about Hollow? And he's playing it in PvP. And asked a lot of questions and learned. And I was so afraid of going into raids that I only did Iceberg Saga Strikes. This is right when the Iceberg Saga Strikes came out, and they advertised them and marketed them as if they were an entry point to raids. So I just kept doing them over and over and over again. And I was hitting like I was like top DPS all the time. And then one time somebody said, hey, we're actually going to go on and do Wing 1. Do you want to join us? And I said, I've never done a raid before. And everyone was like, what? Like, how is that possible? Because you're the top damage here. And I was like, well, no one will let me in. So what am I supposed to do? And they're like, well, just join us. And so I went along with them and it went okay. And then there were a few other moments where people, this is actually really good. Do you guys know a quatter? Have you ever heard of a quatter? Do you know a quatter?
Mm-mm.
It's Joe. Anyway, a quatter. I think this is how it goes. Maybe he could correct me, but one time a quatter messaged me and I had no idea who he was. And he was like, hey, you down for Wing 6? And I was like, I have no idea who you are. And I don't know what Wing 6 is. And he's like, do I have the wrong person? And apparently there's some other person that also has the name Sneb. I don't know. But he messaged the wrong person, and then they just brought me in anyway. And of course I died immediately, but they just kind of carried me through Wing 6. And afterwards I was hooked. I was like, man, I really need to learn this. And of course I also did it because I wanted to get the portal device to be able to do Drakkar better. So that's kind of my raid story. I suppose I was never like a very good player at the beginning. In fact, people made fun of me and called me in kindness, but they said that I was the 15k hollow. I could only do 15k DPS, and it's because I just wasn't very good at it yet, right? The settings were all off. I didn't know how anything worked. I just was throwing myself out there and trying to do better.
So Gix was right. You were the top damage before ever doing a raid.
Basically.
Quickly about damage for everybody watching. If you don't think you can do big damage, you can. It's very easy. I want to give a quick shout out to somebody in my Discord server actually today. Let me get the exact name. I believe their name is Netfang. Yeah, Netfang. So they wanted to learn Thief, and they're like, "Oh, I can't do enough damage." Blah 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 blah. And so this guy named Grim from my server, he joined and helped tutor them on how to play Thief. The exact line for line quote in my Discord server 10 minutes later is 10 minutes working with Grim and my DPS is now over 20k. Once I fix my gearing, it'll be even higher. Holy expletive. And then a few minutes later, oh my god, I'm at 30k on rifle now. And they were like doing...
It is ridiculous how many people say I am incapable of hitting these numbers. Meanwhile, I'm on a core guardian pressing 1 a lot and hitting 30k, right? Like I think there's just a perceived barrier to entry here. People go, I can't do this because I don't know how. Not because I'm incapable of it, but they conflate the two. They think that they're incapable when they just don't know how, and they just need more information. It's not people. This isn't some like high level physics thing. It's about pressing a series of buttons in a particular order. And sure, there might be some dexterity associated with that, but it's not quite as difficult as people make it seem. And I'm glad that people are willing to go and help others. I've had very similar results in taking people that are like, oh, I can only do 5k DPS. I'm like, well, it turns out you have full soldier's gear, right? Like we gotta like make a change here.
Time to spend 20 gold and do 10 times the damage.
Yeah, it is absolutely startling how many people get stuck in this trap of the I can't, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I see this literally almost every day. I saw it last night with a very active member of my friend group, where he just thought he was really bad on Condivert. Turns out he was running 2 wrong traits and 3 wrong, and now he's like, I'm doing 10k more. I was like, see, you put yourself in this box, and you stopped looking around. And once he discovered that, he was doing great. And then almost every day, almost every day that I do a training, I'll find someone doing like, let's just say abnormally low numbers, because I'm like, hold on, if you just auto attack, you're gonna do twice that. What is happening? And you mentioned the core guard build. It was too funny. He was running like something willbender, and I was like, you know what? Let's forget your gear. I don't care what you have on. We just set him up with the core guard traits. I sent him a free hammer and was like, just auto attack, and he was doing like 22k on core. So I was like, there you go. You can raid. You just needed to have the right setup. So I'm a
Yeah, if
firm
you're not
believer
doing
that
high DPS, it's usually not your fault mechanically. It is usually just because you lack the information to set up your character correctly with either gear or runes or sigils, or
it's like
usually a
80% of the
combination.
fight. Like 80% of it is just have the right stuff going into it. Your buttons is the other 20%. And actually, I'll say the order of which you press those buttons for most builds is only 10%. Pressing the buttons at all is 10%. So you'll do 90% of what you need to do in this game if you just have the right stuff and press your buttons. That's it.
Yep. I'm going to flame the game for a second. I don't think that the game does a very good job helping push people in that direction. In fact, I think the game rewards people for doing the opposite. Here's a good example. I think I brought this up the other day, maybe in the other podcast too, or maybe it was after. Time is a figment of our imagination and completely made up. I made a character and I leveled to 80 with no gear and no weapons. And I used a racial skill on Sylvari to provide 1 second of regen to an NPC. And the sea parted and all of the kings of all the land came and they said, Sneb, here's a gold medal with max rewards. You have saved the village. Thank you for that 1 second of regen. I appreciate it. And, you know, I jest, but I think that is a bit of a strange issue because we go out in the open world and we just do stuff and we're given the absolute max rewards for doing almost nothing. This is why when people ask me what they should play, lately I just try to say Herald. I just say play Herald, give everyone boons, get more rewards than everyone else because they're providing boons, and then just do some damage and live forever. And you'll be very happy. I'm not proud that I give that advice, but it's kind of true. If you provide some boons, you get a gold medal. If you walk around and hit something one time in the last 30 seconds, you get a gold medal. And in my mind, what this does is it tacitly, or even more just directly, reinforces the idea that it doesn't matter what you're doing, you just win. And if you never have to engage in any way with stats, with gear, with what weapons you're using or whatever, and you're just handed the gold medal every time, then why would you ever make any other change? And so I guess the pro to that is, hey, you don't really have to worry about it. But the con is whenever you want to do anything that's a step harder, it's going to feel like a mountain to climb.
Do you want to hear my super hot take on game systems?
Yeah, let's hear it.
I think that they should hire somebody from Snowcrows, like legit hire somebody from Snowcrows as a contractor, make them run through every single gear stat in the game, and make it so depending on what stats are associated with that gear stat, if it is not a explicit, like already performing DPS gear, that it does at least like 30 to 40% of somebody that had pure DPS gear. Like give some pity power, give some pity condi. That way, when people hit endgame, they aren't in these gear stats where they're like, oh, I put this on because I never die in it. And I still kill everything. Yeah. And that way, even if they get into a endgame content, they can do some damage. Because right now, the gear disparity is ludicrous.
Oh, like, but it's gotten better.
Any other MMO, it's like any other MMO, like it's gear it's gear score. You look at the eye level of whatever in any other MMO, and you're like, oh, okay, it's that good. In this MMO, max statted gear, you can do either 2k DPS or 30k DPS on a character, depending on if your gear, runes, sigils, they're all set up correctly.
Yeah, maybe going along with that, if I were to make a sweeping change, right? Like if ArenaNet was like, Sneb, we have hired you for one day, you get to do whatever you want. I'd be like, oh, here we go. I never, ever would have done relics, ever. And the reason is because it is so bloody complicated. If I did relics, then I would have made it so that runes are one rune that's outside your gear. They don't attach to gear. Now, I realize, I just want to recognize that this is probably far more complicated than I'm making it appear because of the economy and systems and UI and all of that. But this is my dream. The runes and the sigils look like it's PvP, where they're outside of the gear. And you do this to make an empty slot that people have to fill because it's more likely that they'll fill it that way. But so many people get confused with the rune bonuses and they just put 6 random runes on, or they only put 3 runes or whatever. Having it so that you need 6 runes to do that, it just confuses people. The systems are just a little bit too complex, and adding relics to that mix has just made it even more complex to me. I also would get rid of the underwater breather. I would just make it a skin. I would just make it so that your stats are pulled from your helmet.
Can I just say that the relics, I'm not as opposed to them as you are, but they are the worst explained part of the entire game. And some of the relics will literally just be like, you do a thing, and it won't give a cooldown. It won't give like damage numbers. It won't give what it's pulling from. It won't give durations. It won't give ranges. It'll just be like, I think the Wizard's Tower one was a good example, the first one. It's just like when you do, like, I think it was the elite skill, you pull in and then you get a reflective shield. And the pull in was like 200 range or something, and the shield was like for 1 second. So people would get that being like, oh, I'm going to be like a juggernaut with this. Like, I'm going to get like a super mode. And then it's like, nope. Doink. And they didn't explain it at all. And another one was like, there's a one, I'm not a DPS player, but I know it was popular with thieves. It's whenever you shadow step, you send out a dagger. I think it was like Pathos or whatever. But it didn't give any range, any numbers, anything at all. You had to like actively be a playtester for the game to figure out what the ratios were for that, or like what the duration was, what the range was, even what the cooldown was.
It's a mystery.
It just said you shoot out a dagger.
Well, I mean, while we're down that path, I actually think there's just a lot of things that aren't necessarily that well explained, period. And I think they've made some really strategic decisions, though. For example, showing the Defiance bar damage in a skill is so good, because now you can point out those skills with so much easier. It's way better. But even so, I think not necessitating that people learn these things it makes it so that they just don't. And I'm so conflicted on this, because on one hand, it's like, sure, they don't have to learn it, but they can just jump in and enjoy the game. But on the other hand, if they don't learn it, then they can't like progress in any meaningful way throughout the game. So they get stuck, they get trapped. And it's like little whirlpool of frustration. And I find that quite sad, because you hear all those stories where people have blue gear. I met a player the other day. They walked into our raids, and I said that it was new player friendly, and they were doing 1k DPS on a berserker, and I thought they were a healer. And I was just letting them do their thing, and then I realized that they are not. And they shared their gear, and it was full soldier's gear, so like the old boost gear, and it was just reskinned with legendaries and stuff. And I was like, oh!
Power move, honestly.
Yeah, I was like, oh
that's
no.
A flex. That's given me some ideas to take advantage of. You guys have been nailing down this point. It's a quote that someone said to me like 3 days ago, and I haven't been able to shake it, because I do love this game, and I love to debunk like shitty myths and rumors about this game. So it's one of those things where when you hear something kind of bad about it, it's tying into yesterday. It's the Rose MMO idea of like, everyone says good things about this game, I'm gonna find a way to shit on it. He's looking to poke holes. Is when someone said to me that this game does a very terrible job at teaching you how to get good or better at it in the game. You have to go to these like third-party resources to get better at it. And I was like, it's like that meme with the stick figure dude. He's like, it's just like, I got nothing. You're not wrong. I didn't get better at the game until I started using websites like Snowcrows and Hardstuck and all that.
Who's excited for next expansion when they fix literally half of all endgame problems by making the first story boss have a break bar, and it pops up on screen, you need to use Defiance break to break this break bar, and if you don't, you can't beat it.
And I actually have had suggestions like that too. Here's what you do. You do that, but then you don't even force them to use the skills necessarily. You just want them to interact with the idea that a break bar means that you have to break it. And so you provide like planks and rocks all around it, and you just got to pick up the planks and rocks and throw them or whatever. And maybe you highlight the point that that does show break bar damage in some way, but you've got to do something, right? Like, you need people to understand this. If Dragon's End is any sign of the times, I've been in a few pug Dragon's Ends, and it's pretty doable nowadays. But break bars they sometimes don't get broken, or they're very close, and that's even with the way station.
Can you believe that, like, when they redid the break bar changes and they're like, okay, you no longer do like 1,000,000 more damage of one type when break bar happens, instead you do like 10% more for a short time. People were like, you did more damage when the break bar broke? When was this a thing? Like,
Oh yeah, they
there's
have
so
no
many
idea.
people that were caught off guard by that.
Well, the UI is very small when it comes to buffs and debuffs and stuff. I
Yeah,
have zero recommendation on how to fix that. I won't even pretend like I know what I'm talking about there. But all I know is I have had to train myself to be able to find when stability is on me or not, so that I can be a better player. And the fact that that's so difficult to see, and you have to really train your eye to see it, I don't know if that's a good thing. I think the bar is pretty cluttered at this point.
That
World versus world,
Gorceable
it's like,
moment when you're in the first 5 seconds of your Gorceable pull and you want to do your damage, and you look down at the bar during his second attack, you don't see stability. You have to decide, do I dodge or do I just take it? I agree. That's one fight where I always try to see, do I have stab? Do I have like a block on me? And when you get knocked down, it's demoralizing. Everyone's like, oh, well, there goes my attempt to flex on this fight.
I like Grimm's comment on the stream.
yeah, my first experience with the break bar was fractals during Twilight Oasis. My right group of friends could not understand why the boss kept healing. I had to read the wiki page. Yeah, but again, they've made a lot of really good moves. Like I kind of alluded to this earlier, but one of the best things they ever changed, and this was highly suggested by a lot of the streamers at the time, myself included, was the boost gear used to be soldiers. Do you know what soldiers gear even is? I have to look it up, but it has no offensive stats.
It's power, vitality, toughness. I know because I tanked Deimos on it as using a challenge.
Yeah. Okay, I guess it does have power, but it won't do anything because you have no precision and no ferocity. So imagine every new player coming to the game using the boost, and the boost makes them do less than 10% of their potential. Like, hello, you are now at 5% efficacy after using the boost. This was extremely problematic for so many reasons. And so they changed it to Celestial, and ever since then, everything has been much better. But what's funny about that is I actually think that old veteran players who don't engage with their gear are now worse than players who are brand new that just use the boost. And that's a weird situation.
So you're seeing people who just haven't looked at their gear and messed with their gear in a long time. As the meta shifts, as balances happen, they're becoming worse than people who are hitting level 80 and going to these guides.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Like, I can speak to this as well. You'd be shocked how many times you get somebody in a raid that is like just joining because they've never done raids. They've been playing since launch and they've never done raids. And you see them do, like, your damage feels a little low, and so you're asking like, hey, is everyone using like berserkers or viper's gear or whatever? And there'll be one guy who's like 4,000, 5,000 achievement points. He's been playing for a while, and he's just like, oh, this is just my minion mancer necro. I got this gear at level 80 and it's always worked for me. And then it's because they aren't used to most content in the game. You only need to put out like 2k, 3k DPS and you're fine. And you will eventually win. And so, like, if you get somebody who's played for forever and they've beaten like almost all the content in the game, they're going to think that their gear is fine. But then when they go to like actual endgame challenging content, suddenly it's not fine, and that can get very confusing if you've been using the same gear for like years.
Yeah, and to be very, very clear, there's nothing wrong with playing however the heck you want. I think the issue for me really comes when instance content, you're on a team. And I come from a sports background. I played a lot of sports in high school. My wife is like a college basketball coach. So I equate everything to being on like a sports team. When you're on a team with 9 other people, there's sort of the social contract that occurs where you're like, hey, we are trying to do this for the good of the team. We are trying to accomplish these goals together. And therefore, there must be some self-sacrifice, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there are quite a few people who enter instance content saying, I want to play how I want to play, and nobody can tell me otherwise. But that is so contrary to what you're doing when you're engaging in a team activity, because I should be able to say, hey, friend, you missed that mechanic, and hey, you're doing like 10% of your potential here. What's up with that, right? In a non-rude way or anything, but you should be able to engage in those conversations without hurting people's feelings. But what I find is that a lot of people get really defensive. And I wonder if it's a lot of veteran players who have that mindset where they say, hey, like, this has always worked for me. Who are you to tell me that it doesn't work?
I like this realization that prior to the Wizard's Vault, getting gold and getting gear was a lot harder, and it was a lot less in your face. I'm personally friends with at least a dozen people that have played this game for 11 years and have still never even leveled a crafting discipline. They've been using exotics for 11 years. And now that players are getting multiple pieces of ascended gear right off the bat, I'll just read it straight out of here. Now that it's easier to make gold, it might have caused more people to engage with the gear systems. That's a pretty good point. That could have something to do with newer players being a lot more, I guess, impressive than a couple years ago.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's literally just raids are way more refined content. They're meant specifically for a specific number of players. If you have done open world, your only experience with that is probably dungeons and maybe a early fractal or two, which are extremely easy. And when you get into raids or strikes even now, most of them, except for obviously some of the easier ice brewed ones, are going to demand some level of build, gear, setup refinement, or you're just going to have a miserable time. And some people don't like that. Some people don't like being forced to do anything. And it's not just, it's not forcing them into a class, it's forcing them to change their build, it's forcing them to adjust gear. And you're not, even like me, somebody who's just like, you can come as anything you want as long as you're not griefing and as long as you come in good faith. Sometimes that's just a recipe for failure, because sometimes people just bring let's just say they bring like Guardian with a sword and a shield because they want to be a knight, and they build like full soldier's gear or full knight's gear. Even there is a knight stat. Let's say they saw that there's a knight stat and they're like, oh, I should get this if I want to be a tank, because they don't know what the stats do. You're going to do like nothing. It's going to be miserable for everybody involved. And because a lot of the bosses fixate on toughness, if you're playing in Excel, it's a rule that if you're the tank, you need to have like 22k, not 22k, 2.2k toughness. You need to max out on
do
toughness.
Exactly 1 damage to me with 22k toughness.
Yeah, right. But you need to have max toughness if you're like going to be tanking as a raid leader in Excel, because there are going to be people that bring trailblazers or other gear that may not be non-toughness gear, because they don't know that toughness is how bosses aggro. So you might start a fight with like 1400 toughness, and they're like, I'm clearly the tank. And then it goes and it starts like smacking your thief upside the head. And they're like, oh, I guess you have some toughness on your kit, huh?
Yeah.
So,
I feel like this leads very naturally into the extreme Twitter conversation that happened the other day. And maybe it's still somewhat ongoing, but I think it's worth talking about in a respectful way, of course. There is a Twitter user who's actually a member of SG Static at one point. I don't think they are now. I think they alluded to why on their Twitter conversation. It wasn't necessarily a super negative thing, but how did the conversation even start? I don't even know how it started. I just jumped in the middle.
I think
was
Nike
Nike.
came across the Reddit post, and the Reddit post was, I'll give you the synopsis. Someone was looking for tier 4 fractal group. The group listing in LFG was one guy. I think he was a quick healer, and his LFG post just said looking for a lack DPS. So he knows there's still room for 3 DPS in this group. He joins the group and says, just said deeps. And the guy was like, I was asking for a lack DPS, learn to read, and then left the group because there's no party leader system. And when it's just 2 of you, you can't kick somebody. And that stirred up this post that he brought to Reddit saying, hey, like, what's with the toxic endgame LFG system and what's going on with this? And it inspired Nike to say that the most important people in the group are commanders and leaders, and making life difficult for them is going to basically kill the game. So I think it was Nike's stance, and I'm open to being corrected if I got this wrong, was that, the guy should have read the post. He wasn't asking for DPS yet. And by joining and frustrating him, that's a bad thing. You don't want to piss off the people that are leading content. My personal counter to that was I think they both could have communicated better. The one guy could have joined and said, hey, I see you're asking for a lack. Is it okay if I just DPS? And if he says no, he goes, okay, well, I can a lack anyways, because that's what he alluded to in the comments. He said, I could have just switched to a lack. It wouldn't have been a big deal, but the guy wanted to be an asshole, tell me learn to read, and then left. Whereas the guy who said learn to read and left could have just been like, can you a lack? Okay, cool. They could have both prevented that from happening if either one of them wanted to give it one extra sentence of communication. And then that struck up a whole lot of probably 30 or so comments.
I'm inclined to agree with you that they could have communicated better. My one stipulation with that is, or it's not really a stipulation, they could have communicated better, period. But what I find most intriguing about this is that would never have happened if the LFG system was a little bit different. If you made a post that people had to apply to get in or something, and they said, I can play DPS, alacrity, then the communication is done for them. So you're not relying on people's communication skills. Because it turns out that people aren't very good at communicating in an online medium through text, and that text can be interpreted in a variety of ways, and that creates a lot of problems. And that when problems occur, people do not like discussing them, and they will immediately just self-implode. So I think that the LFG system is largely at fault for a lot of this, but at the same time, people just need to communicate better.
A game, I talk about Ion Online a lot because I loved that game. Ion came out 4 years before Guild Wars 2 did. And even Ion had that system. It was a text-based system in chat, but it would simply say so-and-so applied, accept or deny. And that would give you the opportunity to click their name and whisper them and say, hey, what do you bring in? Oh, Gladiator? Oh, I need a Templar, sorry, or whatever, and you would reject it. So I think that was mentioned. That was mentioned in this thread, that if there was simply one step between reading the LFG and being in the group, it would alleviate a lot of these problems.
I think communication just needs to be better. But at the same time, the LFG system is awful. And it has not changed for a very long time. And I think they do need to change it. And it shouldn't be literally just a UI update where it defaults to a bigger size so that people don't only see the first 3 words of whatever group they're going into. And it makes it so that it shows the full sentences. Like Final Fantasy XIV, if you pull open Party Finder, it is automatically enormous. It covers most of your screen, and you can see a full sentence of what they want. And Final Fantasy XIV, I'm sure people will argue with me, but I've done Savage Raids and Final Fantasy XIV stuff. I'm fairly experienced with the game. It is not that complicated of a game as soon as you learn the boss mechanics, because every mechanic is either stand here or kill something. So most of it is derived off of gear score and player mechanical execution. So it's not as complicated as I need this boon, I need this boon, I need this boon. It used to be that way in previous expansions where things could give unique debuffs, but I'm getting off topic. What I'm trying to say is Guild Wars 2 is even a slightly more complicated system as far as party makeup is concerned, and it is way less informative, and you get way less information about the group. Like, I can see there's a Scourge in that group. Is that a healer Scourge? Is that a DPS Scourge? I can see the first 3 words that say running wing 4, maybe. And then the rest is cut off unless I expand the LFG screen. And it could say, like, need specifically this. And I wouldn't know that until I join the group. And then I'm not that, so then I'm going to get kicked, and it's going to be a feels bad moment, and I'm going to be like, oh, everyone's so toxic on LFG. So I think the LFG window itself is actually causing some of these problems.
And players try to correct that by coming up with their own requirements, by putting it in the post, everything from kill proof to titles to just descriptions of experience. Can we maybe touch on that a little bit? I know Gix.
Yeah.
I was. Go ahead, Snow.
Sorry, I realized I was muted because my dog was running around. I 100% agree. I think there's a huge issue with the LFG, so much so that people just don't use it. When I log in and I'm like, I'd like to just jump into a raid, and I look and there's like nothing there, or there's something there, but it just says like wing 1 and the person has no commander tag, and I have no, it creates this like, well, I have no idea what I'm going to get, right? It's kind of like going to a restaurant and the menu just says burger. And you're like,
I'll take 2.
What does it mean, right? What is this burger you speak of? And what will it entail? What am I getting myself into here? You have no clue. And that's a bit of an issue because it just prevents people from wanting to order. So they're just not going to engage with the LFG, and this is why people make their own LFG outside the game, but all that does is really damage the raid ecosystem, because now you have a lot of people who might come in top of funnel, but you're adding more and more barriers to entry, and that will ultimately prevent a lot of people from getting into raids.
Yeah, so I only advertise Excel every, it's sometimes 50, sometimes 100, depending on how, like generally it's like every 3 months or so, because I don't want to overwhelm the raid leaders because they're all volunteers, and like I want to keep things chill and casual and get as many people into raids as possible. What I'm trying to get at is I only advertise every so often, and we're at 400 armors now, and I'm still getting dozens of people saying, I never knew this existed. I thought raids were impossible to get into. No one's ever running them in the LFG. Like, man, I wish that I knew that this existed. And I'm like, oh, but there's Gamer Haven as well. There's Skygang. There's Hardstuck. There's Raid Academy. And they're like, wow, when did these pop up? And I'm like, I don't know, like 10 years ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing. I'll pop off about this. Sorry, it'll be like a slight rant, but I have maybe somewhat aggressively advertised in the LFG. And my logic for doing this was there are a lot of people that don't know that these things exist, that you can find people to play with that are at your skill level or at your experience level, or are going for the things that you personally want. And you can find a team, make some friends, and have a good time raiding. And so I thought, I'll just essentially, instead of having a million different people posting for their team, I'll take all the responsibility of posting on behalf of 140 teams. And so I was using all my alt accounts, going to the LFG, advertising and saying, hey, like if you're looking for a static, here's where you go. And I've got hundreds, if not thousands of people to do that. But people, like, there are several Reddit threads made that were highlighting my post and saying how it should be reported and how it was against the rules. And they were lumping me in with all the raid sellers. And obviously I'm biased, but my opinion on that is, man, they're telling people to go and block me because I'm trying to help people find a team to play with. And I don't do it very often anymore. I'll very occasionally put something in the LFG, but at this point, like my life is somewhat stressful, and I don't need people trying to make it more stressful for something very, very small, right? Yeah, I tried to warn people, and I got downvoted to oblivion. I said, do not encourage people to block people that are advertising for their raid group, because those are the very kind of people that are going to be looking for a fill one night in the LFG, or they're going to post a random pug, you know? Those are the kinds of leaders. Those people are leaders. They're going to post, and maybe they have alt accounts where they do that too. You have no idea, and you will never see their posts again. Maybe they go and do Dragon's End every Wednesday, and you happen to log in that time. You're never going to see their posts because you blocked them. And that got downvoted into oblivion, and people thought I was just making excuses. But it's so true. My alt accounts are unplayable now. I cannot post in the LFG and find a group on my alt accounts, so I just don't. I just stopped making LFGs because everyone blocked me. And fair enough, they're totally within their right to do that. But I think it just shows that we have a big problem with how the LFG functions, with how people get into raids, with how they find these communities. When people say, oh, well, just go advertise in other Discords. Not everyone who downloads the game is going to want to go on this safari adventure of finding every Guild Wars 2 Discord that ever exists. It's a ridiculous notion for that to be for that to be an expectation.
I do block the sellers, though. I'm not going to lie, because those are the people that are never going to join my groups.
Yeah, maybe not.
You would be surprised.
I've been told. Well, I've actually been told by a few people who I think had credible input that I've been blocked due to the fact that I offer free raids. Much like yourself, Gix, that because we're the competition of the gold sellers, because we're giving people the opportunity to get those exact same things for free. Wasn't that part of your congratulatory announcement? Was we saved people like $200,000 based on the current raid training prices to accomplish the exact same thing? So the raid sellers, I've been told that they don't like us.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, go ahead, Gix.
Yeah, I actually am kind of. I have a weird opinion on this because I don't dislike raid sellers. Actually,
I don't either.
I think they offer a service to the community. I think it's just crazy oversaturated and crazy overpriced. But like, if somebody wants raid armor and it is unique armor, it is not armor you can get any other way, and they only have like an hour a week to play the game, which is, it may sound ridiculous to some people, but it's some people that's the reality, and they have an excess of cash. They can put money into Guild Wars 2, which helps the company because they're putting it into the system. They're turning it into coins, and then they're turning it into Mystic coins and sending it to the raid seller. And that should not happen very often. That should be rare. But there's so many raid sellers now that it can't be that rare. But I'm of the opinion that raid selling isn't necessarily that bad, but it should be a last resort. I don't think raid sellers have blocked me because I'm always the person that says that in any of the Reddit comments about it. But
I'm going to say like a really inflammatory thing. Anyone that complains about raid selling really aggressively is like hard self-exposing because they're frustrated that they just can't find a group or they don't feel good enough with to do raids. And I think that's sad. And I think all that does is certainly highlight that the LFG needs some upgrades. But raid selling isn't the problem. Don't go and flame raid sellers because you're unhappy that you feel compelled to buy because you can't form a group or because you can't find a group. It's not the raid seller's fault. Raid selling is a service. Services are a healthy part of MMO economies. In fact, Guild Wars 1 had runs, right, where people would run from it's not Beacon's Perch. Where was it? Is it Beacon's Perch to Drox?
Beacon's to Drox.
Yeah.
Beacon's
so they would do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And just likewise, there's nothing wrong. I bought dungeons in Guild Wars 1. I'm self-exposing. I bought Frostmaw Burrows hard mode, and these assassins ran me through that, and I got a Require 9 Silverwing recurve bow, so it all worked out for me. But there's nothing wrong with it. Nothing at all. I don't think there's any moral implication. I don't think it's bad. I think it's just a service that you can choose to engage with or not. When it becomes a problem is when people feel like it's the only option, and that's not the raid seller's fault. That is the system's fault. So if we're going to attack anything, we need to attack the system, not the raid sellers. Many of my friends who are very good players who do a lot of training also raid sell. And they're some of the most helpful people in the community. but they're making thousands of gold by raid selling. The only reason I don't do it is because I feel a deep conflict with doing it. If I do it, I'm basically saying that I've given up on my mission of having people not buy raids. I've intercepted so many raid sells. The raid sellers are a little frustrated with me.
Yeah, I clarified in chat that I don't block them because I don't like them or because I disagree with what they're doing. Anyone who knows me knows I pug, excuse me, a lot. And I just get tired of seeing 4 or 5 or 6 things that aren't groups that I want to join. So I block them just to get them out of the LFG, but that's already been touched on. It's the system that's the problem. I just don't want to see their advertisement no differently than clicking the X on the ad when I'm trying to read an article. I'm like, get that out of here. That's not what I want to see right now. I'm not blaming the person for advertising their company. That's their business. That's what they do. There's nothing wrong with that. I just don't want to see it.
Yeah, and that's completely understandable. But I will tell you, Sneb, you mentioned you were blocked from like the LFG earlier. I will tell you, that is not as bad of a situation as you think lately, because I mentioned it somewhere. I've talked to a lot of people the past few days, but I have ran. So before I made the announcement, things were slowing down a little bit because again, it comes in bursts. I only advertise when we get a certain amount of armors, and then it gets fast, and then it slows down, and then it gets fast again when I advertise again. But I was doing runs that I would advertise all day in Excel that would get 0 to 1 signups, and I would still run it because I was like, whatever, I can just get a bunch of new people from LFG because everyone complains that there's never any training runs in the LFG. And it took 30 to 45 minutes each night immediately at reset with a no requirement training run, with the only requirement being to join Discord for my group to fill. And that is with me pinging my server after a while. So LFG isn't even that active right now. I can't really speak to why, but
Well, I feel like you can.
There.
Well, I think you know why. Why is the LFG not active?
Oh yeah, because people are toxic.
Well, I mean, that perception is one, but like, why else? Why don't people want to raid right now?
Lead.
Well, open world armor is definitely a factor.
I agree.
I was going to say, by and large, using the LFG often doesn't result in like a positive outcome. They either sit there, don't get the group, or they get a group and have a bad experience. There's a lot to it. As for why people don't raid, totally different question that's extremely nuanced. I think there's a lot of reasons to that, and part of it is like, when is the last time raids have received an update?
Yeah, I mean, look, if eventually, if you stop watering the plant will die, and people will stop coming to see the plant because it used to be beautiful, but now it's withered away and decomposed into the soil again. And I think the reason people don't raid, I think there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of factors, and each of them contribute X amount to the reason that people don't raid. And it's very subjective. I think you've got why do it when the cost, the opportunity cost to get into it is very high. You're going to spend a lot of time perhaps trying to find a group, hanging out with those groups, doing all of those things, right? The gold per hour is exceptionally high for raids, but it requires that you get to that point first. And for a lot of people, they're like, why would I invest that time and get frustrated and meet bad people and whatever, and essentially go through this big problem when I can just go and AFK at some meta event on a Herald and give some boons and get like 10 gold an hour or something? I don't know. So I think for a lot of people, they just don't see it as worth it. I think the people that engage with raids now are mostly people that enjoy the challenge and camaraderie associated with it, but rewards are totally dead, right? There's nothing in raids that is particularly difficult to get, right?
It also ties into exactly what you just said. What you said when we first started this conversation was that I'll try to coach you the best I can, that nothing in the game is really hard. The hardest part is finding 9 other people that just aren't going to quit on you. Like finding 9 other people that are open to the idea of maybe getting a little bit better and actually learning something. That's the hardest part. Like, objectively, Guild Wars 2 is not hard. It's just, who do you surround yourself with?
I think another, perhaps another big thing about getting into raids is just the community perception of raids is so bad that it puts a lot of people off. Like one of my favorite things to do is to take a group and say, hey, who's new here? And like a bunch of people hold up their hand. And you're like, okay, how hard do you think this is going to be? And you're at like wing 1 and they put like an 8 out of 10. You're like, okay. Then you go and you kill everything within a couple pulls. And you go, okay, how hard do you think this is now that you've done it? And they go 2. The perception of difficulty is wildly inaccurate. And it has a large
mental barrier.
Yeah, it's a huge perceived barrier. And this is propagated by people that actually haven't really done a lot of raiding. Like, Jasper, I know you're in the Facebook group because I see you post there. And I think Sab is too, actually.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there's this guy one time, it was like forever ago, but sometimes people go like, raiding is so hard, and they like pop off about it. And every once in a while I'll engage because I'm being baited. And I engage and I say, oh, like, can you tell me more about that negative experience you had? And they go, well, I've never actually raided. I'm like, well, then what are you talking about? I'm like, well, I just think all raiders are toxic. Like, but you have no, like, there's nothing, what? What are you talking about? This is like a very difficult, like, how do you stop that, right? People are just spreading misinformation, and turns out if people say that enough, people will start to believe it.
Yeah, I always say, I've said this probably 20 times since I started XL, but like, especially in our raid leader channel, I'm just like, there's 2 kinds of new players to raids. One, they have full celestial gear, no masteries, and they are just wanting to immediately get into raids, and it's going to be a very painful experience. 2, they think it's the hardest content that's ever been created. They have a full build. They've benched like 32k on Snow Crows, and they have every piece of gear already maxed out with Ascended. And there is barely any middle ground.
That's a great point. You don't really find the person that has like half of it set up. They've either fully prepared or they haven't prepared at all. Yeah, that's more true than I'd like to admit. I just shared an unpopular opinion that I think I've had. Maybe with you guys, it's not so unpopular, but it's that I encounter more toxic casuals than toxic elitists. Because to be honest, in my opinion, a lot of the toxic elitists, they're not going to cause drama. They just leave the group. The moment they identify something they don't like about the group, they just leave, because they're often like a no bullshit, I don't have time to waste kind of mindset. And they're to add on to the rest of that, this was one of my tweet replies. The only thing worse than a mediocre a-hole greeting DPS is the entitled underperformer wasting everybody's time. And my favorite gamer is the one right in the middle. The person who they're like, I want to do great. I want to learn my rotation. I want to be amazing at this game. I want to come prepared and pump, but I simultaneously don't care what everyone else is doing. The person who just injects themselves into groups for the benefit of the group, regardless of if the group has underperformers in it. I love those people. I add those people to my friend list immediately and start conversations with them.
I'm exposed to those people all the time. Sneba has something to say, so I'm not going to go too long, but I'm just saying,
no, you go.
I'm very casual friendly, as everyone who knows me knows. I would consider myself a casual, actually, even though I've done this forever and I've done pretty much all the content. I don't care about improving myself. I care about doing good enough and making sure that everyone's happy and is having a good time, and that they can get as good as they want to get. But I am exposed very frequently to people that are like, do I need to join the Discord to do this raid, where the only requirement was joining the Discord? Yep. And then they'll say something mean to me and leave. Or they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry that I have 2,000 toughness. Was I not supposed to have that as a DPS? And I'm like, no, we can help you though. I can get you gear. And they're like, I don't want to change my build. And I'm like, okay, well, I can put myself up, but you won't do much damage. And then they call me elitist, and then they'll leave. I've had a time where somebody said that they didn't like playing DPS because it was too stressful to get the high numbers. And I said, oh, well, I'm similar to that. I don't like DPS racing, so I picked up support, and I love it. It's very easy. You just need to memorize your rotation, and you'll do amazing as a support. And the DPS pressure is gone for most fights in the game. And then they said, you need to stop forcing me into being a support. And then they called me a few names and left. And I'm just like, I don't know how to help you at this point.
I've had people volunteer for a role, and then after the content had concluded, they were upset that they were forced into that role. Like, you asked for this. Like, that's what you were comfortable doing. And it might be because one person just asked the question of, hey, who's a lack? They weren't doing it because performance was bad, but that's not how that person perceived it. They immediately just jumped to the conclusion of, okay, something bad happened. They're trying to single me out, and they left. The newer raiders are often, I would say, if you're just getting into raiding at this day and age, I think it's more common that they've had a negative experience than no experience, at least that I've seen, and it's a fragile song and dance to play with them.
The reason that I don't do a lot of training nowadays is, one, I feel like I've put in my time. I did a lot of training. I still do it every now and then, but I used to do it literally every day. Every time I played, I would only train people. And that was fun and everything. But now I just have experienced so many people complaining to me about something I'm doing for absolutely free that it's like killed a lot of the joy that comes from it, right? It's very frustrating. And I also am just of the opinion that if somebody really wants to learn something, one of the best ways to learn is just by chucking yourself in there and making a bunch of mistakes and playing with some friends. And so I much prefer to push people into organized groups or creating their own progression group rather than trying to, explicitly tell them they need to do training and all of that. But I mean, all the methods work. Just getting people in there and getting them exposed to training or exposed to raids is a positive thing. But I'm just tired of dealing with people that are going to complain about something that is just so innocuous or so small. The number of times where people have gotten mad at me because I've had to I'm unwilling to be a bystander and just watch them do really poorly and carry them through and then have them go into a different group and get kicked. It's very high. I get a lot of flack for being very honest with people.
I'd love to hear from both of you on a very specific topic, because I think it applies to all of us. Ix, you pride yourself in what you call no requirement raid training, and I'd like to clarify to everybody else. I'm kind of speaking on your behalf here, so correct me if I'm wrong. It's labeled no requirement, but that's not like the result people would think, because the majority of people who are joining are like willing to learn and willing to try and willing to bring the right gear. It doesn't mean that people are just bringing things that aren't meta. It just means that you're not forcing them right out the door to come on this build. That you're just helping them figure that out on their own. So no requirement doesn't mean everyone's trash. It just means that you're not forcing it at the door.
Yeah, and this is a huge white pill for probably a bunch of people, but this has rarely ever been an issue. And I've always been no rec, except for like, we're doing a CM training tonight. Please bring something meta. And please be experienced. And those have to be specifically labeled in my server. Everything that's not specifically labeled is considered a training. But whenever I do a run, and other raid leaders do this differently, I don't force people to do this, but I do say it usually needs to be no rec unless you specify otherwise. But what I do is I just say, I'm doing this, all are welcome. And then when 10 people get inside the server, I say, join the Discord call. When 10 people are in the call, I say, hey, if you're going to be a healer tonight, put an H in squad chat. Do that. And then I'm like, okay, sometimes there's 3 healers. And I'll be like, okay, I'll go to a third group and we can do that. 3 healing is actually an extremely valid raid strat if you just want to get through the raid. You're not going to get any records, but it's usually safer if you're doing with new players. Then I'm like, who's doing quickness? And sometimes I get 4 quickness. And I'm like, I'll just sort them into groups. Sometimes people will bow out. They'll be like, okay, I'll just do DPS then if we have other quickness. Then I'll be like, who's alacrity? And alacrity is always the hardest one. And sometimes we don't get any alacrity. And I'll be like, okay, there's no alacrity. Then I'll be like, okay, so we have this, this, and this. If we have extra healers, I'll be like, we'll be doing way more damage if we have 1 less healer. But this is safe to beat the raid with. You can beat the raid with this. If we have extra quickness, I'll be like, we would probably be doing more damage if we had only 2 quickness, but this will guarantee we probably have 100% quickness uptime, and quickness is an important buff. And alacrity, I usually have to give the speech of, okay, so we don't have alacrity, but just know that you would be doing more damage and there would be more healing if we did have alacrity, but the raid is totally doable without it, so do not feel obliged to switch if you don't want to. Then we go in and we clear the raid. And sometimes I get people that do barely any damage, and that's fine. I know that Sneb earlier was like, there's somebody that's just not doing anything, I need to step in, which is, by the way, for everybody who's like, oh no, that's not toxic. That he's trying to help you. He's trying to make sure that you know that there's a problem.
I asked them for
blatantly
permission.
obvious.
I asked
Yeah.
them for permission now. And I respect their wishes either way. I say, hey, you know, are you interested in receiving some feedback about your performance in this? And I would say that most of the time people are like, what do you mean? Sure. Yeah, whatever. And I'm like, hey, just so you know, you did about 4K damage per second and the top DPS there did about 30. And so what this means is that they're doing like 6 times your damage, which means that 6 of you is equal to 1 of them. This doesn't have any bearing on who you are as a person, or it doesn't define your potential or anything, but I think there's something we could do to get you closer to their number. And if you're interested in hearing what that is, I'm happy to support and help you. But if you also are just like, nah, it's not for me, then I'm happy to just walk away. But I feel like, you know, maybe you should know. And most of the time, they're totally happy to receive the help. In fact, in the last 3 days, I've helped like 2 or 3 of those kind of people. And it's really positive. But every once in a while, there is somebody that says no. And it takes every fiber of my being to not say anything, but I don't. And I find it immensely frustrating. Like because
you ever type up a full reply and then just backspace it, and you're like, nah,
basically.
Well,
it's just because it's so contrary to what how I conduct myself and what I believe, what my values are, right? So when somebody's like, you know what, I was cool with, and they probably don't really mean it like this, but in my mind, it's kind of like saying, you know, I'm cool with being carried. And I'm like, but why, right? Why are you cool with this?
I'm a lot like that, actually, where like I would, if I saw a problem, I would immediately want to fix it, which is why I run 0 add-ons of any kind, because I know that if I did run add-ons, I would fixate on somebody not doing great, and I don't want to do that. But I will, every single raid, be like, you should be doing at least 10k damage. If you're not doing 10k damage, you're doing under the minimum that people usually require for this content.
Yeah.
So going from the no requirement up to the actual question I have, and I know Sneb, you had some good insight on this one. It's been I guess claimed by a few individuals in this conversation we've referenced. Are there such thing as ridiculous requirements? And if there are, where do you draw the line? The line is subjective.
No,
Some
I think
people
there are no ridiculous requirements. I think, well, yes and no. So like if I did a group where I said, you need to link me 6 pieces of legendary armor, the stone dwarf thumb, and 250 chocolate bananas, or you can't be in my group. First off, only hilarious people would join that group, which I view as a win if even a single person joins. Second off, that group's never going to fill. And it's self-regulating, where like if you make a group too crazy, you're never going to get a group. And then people that do fit the few people that do fit the requirement are going to join, and then they're going to leave because the group's not going to fill. And then so I think that requirements are fine, whatever you want to set them as. Just know that if your group's not filling, it would fill faster if you had less.
Ping banana penetration or kick.
Yeah, people are entitled to play however they want. If you don't like how my group is set up, you can start a group. You have that power.
That's what I advocate for all the time. We won't say names here, but some people in the content creation sphere think that this game is full of gatekeepers. And I'd say you can't gatekeep in Guild Wars 2 because there's nothing stopping somebody from just making their own group and making their own requirements. And like that's exactly what a lot of us, I think all 3 of us ultimately did at one point. We just decided to start leading our own groups, and here we are. Wouldn't you believe that leads to great things? So I don't think this game has a lot of gatekeeping, if any, and those that do exist, you can just go around them. If someone's asking for requirements that you don't fit, yeah, that's fine. That's their prerogative. They can do that. Just don't engage with that person.
I'm going to maybe phrase this a little bit differently. I think there are such things as ridiculous requirements, but that it's just irrelevant. Like it just doesn't matter. I can go and ask for, and I did this yesterday. I said Doom CM 1 billion KP. I put that in the LFG, and you know what? A bunch of people join, and it's not like I'm actually KP checking them, but I could say whatever I want. It doesn't matter. Who cares? I could require that somebody has 5K LI in my group, and guess what? That's going to make the pool really, really small. And I can enforce that as much as I want, and that's going to make the pool really, really small. No one has to join that group. No one is required to join it. Nobody should feel obligated to join it. In fact, maybe if nobody joins the group, then the group will lower the requirements and they will self-regulate. I actually view KP requirements as like an economic thing. I think that if people don't join, if something's really expensive or there's like lots of KP and people just don't buy it, then the price will be lowered. But it turns out that people like joining those groups. Why do they like joining those groups? Because those groups, on average, have a higher success rate. Why do people not make 5 KP groups? Because they know those groups will fail more. If they're a really experienced player and they have 250 KP, why wouldn't they want to play with other people who are at about that same experience level? That's what's enjoyable for you. There's nothing wrong with playing how you want to play.
Yeah. That's a preference. That's a standard. It's not elitist to have standards. It's elitist to think that you're better or treat people worse because of those standards. But it's not elitist to have those standards because, like you said, who doesn't want to play with like-minded and equally skilled players or better skilled players?
Yeah, I really wonder, like, when people say elitist, what do they mean? Do they say that? Do they just mean that these are elite players and they want to play with other elite players? I don't think there's anything wrong with joining a basketball league that has a requirement of like, hey, you had to have played college ball before. I don't see anything wrong with that. In fact, I just see that as a safety thing in many ways. And in the case of raids, I would argue that it's a psychological safety thing because you're going to be playing with people who are either way better or way worse. And you have really incongruent expectations. Raiding and just playing games in general are so much better when you're playing with people that have the same expectations. If you were to never allow any requirements, then people would be just upset with each other all the time. The LFG causes conflict when you don't use measures of, when you don't have standards.
I have had multiple people tell me that elitists, and this is, again, the Facebook group, so you probably know where this is going, but whenever somebody says they got kicked by elitists, I always ask them, I think you guys do too, because you just get curious, like, right? Like, because it doesn't happen that often, where people just kick you for not being good before the fight even starts. And so I'll ask them, like, what do you mean by you got kicked by elitists? And they'll be like, oh, I joined a KP run, and I didn't have any KP, and so they kicked me. And I'm like, Why did you join the KP run?
Yeah. Well, to be charitable, I think a lot of people look at all those acronyms and have no idea what they mean. Again, extreme hot take. Everybody in the chat is going to put like the blue face. You know what I'm talking about? You guys know about the blue face? The blue face is like the D and then the colon. Yeah, anyway, the blue face. Everyone's going to put the blue face about this one. I think there should be more gates, not less gates, not fewer gates. There should be more gates. And the reason there should be more gates is because we are sheep. And if we escape the pasture, we go onto the road and we get hit by a car. Okay? We need gates to keep us safe. And one of the issues with raids is that a brand new player goes into raids and they're like, I know some of these words, and they click join. I've literally had people go, they join and I'll go, hey, you coming to the raid? They're like, how do I get there? And I'm like, I was asking for experience. What the, right? This person has no idea what's going on. And I'm happy that they have the courage to join a group, but why does the game allow a brand new player to just jump into raids when in fractals, it requires you to like get to T4. It requires you to kind of go through the process of like leveling up the fractal levels.
Yeah, so you know they
why
have
is
those
this happening? Sorry, what'd you say? Go ahead.
I was just saying, so you know they have the systems because they do it for fractals. Like they could just do that for raids.
Yeah, the fact that it's so dichotomous. There's either training or experienced, and like, what does that even mean? Because training, I dislike that. I'm so angry about this. I dislike that they have the training thing at all, or that they only have the training thing. Rather, why is it that you either need experienced players to teach you how to raid or you already know the raid? That doesn't make any sense. Why is there not like a progression or a novice or a beginner where people can go and make their own groups for people who are also pretty new? But training implies, and actually it doesn't even imply, it directly says in the LFG when you scroll over it, it's like veteran players will guide you on a tour through the raids. And you're like, this is just putting so much unnecessary pressure on experienced players. It makes zero sense. They should really kind of split that up and make it so that we need to empower people to make their own groups. It's the only way to have low KP groups and low experience groups is to not force already experienced players to do it, but to take the people that are at that skill level and empower them to make their own groups. Rant over.
That was my solution. So I've got nothing on the contrary for that.
Also, the experience thing is kind of a vague term. They could be like, "Oh yeah, I've beaten all the campaigns. I'm an experienced player. I'm going to join a group." Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be experienced in raids. They could be like, "Oh, training. That must mean that people that are new to the game and experienced. I have my Minion Mancer build that I've beaten all the campaigns with, so it's clearly good. So I'm just going to join an experienced group."
I want to mention. I don't think anyone in the raiding scene doesn't know this line. I'm gonna butcher it, but the Mukluk experience of asking for quick DPS, and this guy joins on like Scourge, and they're about to start the fight, and they start the fight, and he's on Scourge, and he's like, "Hey, are you quick DPS?" And the guy's like, "Yeah." He's like, we don't have any quickness." And the guy's like, "Look, man, I'm DPSing as fast as I can. I don't know what you want from me."
It's true. I could do even one better. Real experience, by the way. Christmas time. You know how they have the Freezy Strike? You know, they have the Freezy Strike mission. I went into the LFG and I said, looking for DPS or whatever. And the guy joins on like Core Necromancer. And he says DPS. And admittedly, I sat back in my chair like this. For those that are just listening, I'm leaning back, hands over my head. And I just thought about it for a second. And then I just said, "What does DPS mean?" And the guy said, "I have no idea." And I was like, "Oh, that's a super base, right?" Like, this guy's joining. He's like, "Yeah, man, I am the DPS," but he has no idea what it means, right? It's just like a big problem, right? Where there's no way you're putting a lot of pressure on people that make groups to do all the filtering themselves. And I actually think it would be much more appropriate if you're able to find people that are what you're looking for. And I say this as somebody who also at a time wanted to find other people who were low level and wanted to do progression. That I'm speaking as that person. I wanted to find other people who wanted to do blind raids, who wanted to go and experience content for the first time together. And you just can't find that. Sometimes you're forced to play with other people who are just blowing through everything or carrying you through with a heal scourge. And sometimes that's not what you want. And I think we would all be better off if there were more gates. But if you guys want, I kind of want your feedback on another thing that happened to me yesterday, actually, because I still feel a little bit bad about this. And I want to know, you can, it's kind of one of those, am I the a-hole here? And you can just tell me if I am. You guys cool with that?
I'm totally down.
Okay, so yesterday, I saw this thing in the LFG, and these guys were from my guild, and I joined, and I was like, we weren't finding anybody, and I was like, okay, give me the tag. Let's do Doom CM, because they wanted to do Doom CM, and I was like, sweet, let's do it. So I went and found a bunch of people. I put us in the LFG in the experience tab, and I said Doom CM looking for Giga DPS. Somebody joins. They're on Soul Beast, whatever. That's Giga DPS to me. We join. They get picked in the first 5 seconds. So we break them out, and then they immediately get picked again. And I go, okay, GG. So we restart. They get picked again immediately, right? And at this point, I'm actually thinking, like, have they joined to sabotage the run? And I know that's not a good thought to have, but if you're getting picked that fast, I'm starting to wonder if it's intentional.
You're like, this guy has to be doing this on purpose.
Yeah. I mean, and so, and we're all in voice, and I'm saying, like, do not get picked. Your only job is to not get picked. Do not get picked. And we do another run, and the whole time, admittedly, I have like thoughts of like extreme darkness when this is happening to me in Doom CM, and I just keep verbalizing, like, I don't know if we can actually do this. Meanwhile, I've got like 5 giga gamers, but like we're just getting picked so much that it's bad. And I'm starting to get like a little bit frustrated, admittedly, because I'm human. And so we GG, it's like the 5th pull or 6th pull maybe. And I just say, okay, don't take offense to this, anyone, but is there anyone here that hasn't done normal mode Doom? Because we're dying to normal mode mechanics. And somebody writes, oh yeah, I'll be honest, I have no idea what's going on. And I'm like, like if I'm a thermometer, it's like, woo, all the way to the top. I am so mad. I am so angry because they didn't tell us. I had no idea that they didn't know. And so I was just assuming that they were making mistakes, right? And I was trying to be kind about it, but they didn't say anything. I don't ask for KP, and because I don't ask for KP, sometimes this kind of stuff can happen, and I feel taken advantage of. So my thermometer goes up. I'm frustrated now. I'm kind of angry, and I feel taken advantage of. And so I bite my tongue. Like it's on stream. You can go watch the VOD if you want, but you can tell that I'm pretty pissed. And I just say, like, do you know what you're doing here? Like this, you realize that you've just wasted 9 people's time, right? Do you recognize that you lied by omission, and as a result, that's not cool, right? Like why didn't you say anything? Like, oh, I just didn't know what this was all about. I guess I just made a mistake, right? And I was like, it's fine, but you can never do this again, right? Like never do this again. And I think I was pretty stern with them. Like what else do you do in that situation, right? What else do you do?
You weren't the asshole. No.
I still feel bad. I offered to take them later and like train them or whatever, but I can't help but wonder if they were lying to me. And I know that's bad. Maybe I have like a complex with this, but they just said, oh, I didn't understand what was going on. Yeah, yes. He joined the experienced LFG and had no idea what was going on, said nothing. Like I can't help but think that something's wrong there, right? Like I don't know. Are my standards too high? Was I just rude? I don't know. I was very, very frustrated.
All right. So I am a very tolerant, patient person. Most people would agree. Obviously, you're entitled to disagree. But I don't think some people realize that when you join a raid, there are 9 other people in that raid that want to beat the content. And it is extremely rare. But I have gotten angry and stern with people. And it is exactly for that same reason, where they join under false pretenses, whether it's a troll or we had one of our experienced runs and they joined because they didn't read at all and they wanted to get in, and then they lied when they said they were experienced. And I will just straight up kick people if they lie. And I will get mad. So like I honestly, I would have done the same thing. And I might have been even more stern. I might have been like, if you do something like this again, I'm banning you from the Discord. So, yeah, I'm on your side. I don't know what it is about Doom, though. Doom, it happens more often than any other encounter. As I guess it is the raid boss. It's that everyone hears about. But Like, I had a Doom training, I think it was last year. It was a while ago now, where you might not even be able to find the VOD anymore, but I was getting actually mad at a Reaper because they had a signet on, and this was an active troll. We have confirmed this after the fact. Again, I don't run add-ons, so I can't see DPS numbers. But everyone was doing the mechanics successfully. We kept losing the fight over and over again because our DPS just wasn't high enough. So eventually, I asked somebody in my raid. Rube might remember this. I think Rube was in the raid if he's still in chat. But I was like, "Is somebody doing way lower than normal DPS? Because this does not feel right." And he's like, "Yeah, the Necro Reaper is doing like 700 DPS." And I'm like, "How is that even possible?" And so it turned out they had a signet on that leached life from enemies. And other than auto attacking every few seconds, that's all their damage. It was just like a million procs of this signet. And they were just following the boss around with the signet to actively try to sabotage the training raid. And I know I've gone on a tangent, but I'm just saying, like, it's something about Doom, man. It brings out the worst in people.
My best Doom CM kills ever are where I open LFG and all it says is Doom CM. The group, it says nothing else. The group fills instantly. We put ourselves in spots, and then the group just beats it. It's along the lines of that group has a 50-50 chance of being absolute horrid, or just giga gamers that are here to get a quick kill. So it's been really funny. One of my favorite things to do, and in good spirits, mind you, with good faith, I join as many raid groups as possible. That especially if it's 9 out of 10, it's been sitting there for a minute. I join to try to help push them to whatever they're trying to do. The first thing I do is I use the arc DPS metrics option, and I hover over that, and it tells you the age of the instance. So as soon as I load into a wing, I'm like, okay, these guys are on Doom, and this instance has been open for 6 hours. So right off the bat, I'm like, all right, I know what to expect from this group. Vice versa, you get in there and it says that they've been in there for like 21 minutes. I'm like, okay, these guys are pumping. So one of my favorite things to check that most people don't realize. And something about Doom CM, it's the only thing that I won't train unless I basically know for a fact that everyone in the group knows the normal mode. And it's weird because it's not even that different. Like, it's practically the exact same fight.
Yeah. There's something about Doom CM that it takes like a bit of your soul every time you do it.
Unintended.
Yeah, for real though. It's a little bit. Somehow I managed to rebound after that and do Sarah CM, but holy, that was a experience. The chat is telling me that the person in question actually didn't speak English very well, which now I feel a little bit bad about that. But I mean, how was I supposed to know, right? In my opinion, you should just be as forthcoming as possible when you join a random group. But I really can empathize with not knowing the language, because that's something I've been in that situation before.
So I just checked the VOD because I wanted to see a little bit for myself, and I saw that they only had like 1.2k AP, and I think AP can't really be used to judge people at all. A lot of the people in my raid trainings learning raids for the first time are over 40k, and a lot of the most like insane gamers I've raided with have 900 AP because they're playing on an alt account. So the use of alt accounts to make more money and enjoy more raids makes AP impossible to judge. And that 1.2k AP most people would think is a red flag, but I just went through all the raid CMs on my brand new account and I have 1.2k AP. So it's kind of funny that you can't even use that metric to identify if they're new or not.
Yeah, because there's no metric to identify whether or not somebody is competent in raids, you just have to guess. And it turns out that entering a raid and having... Oh, why are there so many experiences that I've had when this crap happens? I start a wing 4 all CM. I clearly say that it's experienced. People join. We are doing it. Some guy instantly dies at Cairn, gets yeeted off the edge. And I go, okay, whatever. We get to Mersad Overseer. I say, hey, we are doing the CM. If you do not know the CM, you should probably say something now because you will be hard exposed. We begin the CM. They die to the first blue. They die to the first blue again. They die to the first blue again. I go, do you know the mechanics? And they go, I've never done this before. And I go, why did you not say anything when I asked multiple times? And then I asked them to leave. I was really mad at them. I could not mentally handle the abuse. They had to leave. They had to exit. It happens so much.
I didn't even realize this, that like Raid Academy, for example, has like Spanish raid training sessions. I never even considered the idea of like alternate language raid trainings. The closest thing I've come to that is I hold raid trainings for deaf members. My community's had a large number of deaf individuals. So it's a raid training, but it's all through text. And I just copy pasta a lot of stuff and answer everything via text. And I get a lot of people who can talk that still join those because it's like less stressful.
Yeah.
I think my mic cut out for a second, but yeah, it's less stressful, so they feel less of an obligation to talk.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it definitely does. So where do you think we're going with raids? Like, do you think that it's just totally over? I mean, they've never taken them off the table, I guess. But I have some really interesting ideas about what could be in the next expansion. And I am a Wing 8 believer. I actually think it's very possible. I've thought this for a long time, but there are more and more things that kind of confirm my suspicions. First of all, some of these are purely just opinion, and I understand that. You can all put copium in the comments or whatever, but I don't think that strikes were quite as popular as they thought they would be. I don't think that I think the strikes are okay, but I think that there's just they can iterate on them a little bit and make them better. So I think that combined with the success of HDCM, it got a lot of views. Like, it was free marketing. Well, free, you know what I mean? They had to make it, but it was a huge marketing push for them on Twitch and YouTube. Like, all these people were coming to look. Like, professional WoW raiders were curious about it. And then they did Sarah's CM and they had a similar reaction. The reaction is so strong and so many people are trying to do this. There's so many logs being created that it actually overwhelmed the DPS reports infrastructure, and they had to get some new hardware for the server.
I was reading that announcement the other day. That was pretty cool.
So I think they see that there's some potential here, and frankly, I think they saw that Soto is very much a new player expansion, and I think that's a really positive thing. It made some things more accessible. It opened some things up. But what I've seen, and maybe you've all seen it in your communities, a lot of veteran players have left the game. They are bored to tears by Soto. They do not like it that much. The highlight has certainly been Saris, but there's a particular comment. I asked somebody to be in my Saris team, and they said, why would I come back to Guild Wars 2 when there is one fight for me to do, but in Final Fantasy, there's 100 fights for me to do? Why would I do that? And I thought that was a really powerful point. I think Guild Wars 2 can still be somewhere in the middle, the game that people come back to, but they just need a little bit more than one fight, right? So I think that we could see some kind of resurgence. And then also there was a comment, I don't know if it was by Grouch or something, that said that endgame players would be really happy or really excited about the next expansion. I think all of these things combined lead me to believe that there is a very good chance for Wing 8. And just wait, the LCM thing might have been a happy little accident, but I think that it seems to me that it should be pretty easy to implement in other ways. I think that they can actually go and do more LCM stuff. I think the Wing 8 is actually a possibility. Maybe it's not actually a raid wing. Maybe it's a series of strike missions or something. But I feel very strongly that it's possible. And that has me very hopeful. I think the next expansion could be one of the best that they've ever made, because they also have just made a bunch of mistakes with Soto, and now they can learn from them. It was the first time they tried that format, and I think some things worked and some things didn't. So
if you're listening, stop taking story mode and open world scenes and turning it into instanced combat. We don't want to do the story boss, but harder. We want something different.
Okay, so for everybody in the chat that is spamming copium, and there are a lot of you, I'm actually on the same page with Snep here, and it's for multiple reasons. It's not just what he said. One, this is a team. So End of Dragons kind of did a full refresh on a lot of the people working at ArenaNet because they hired so many new people. You might remember immediately after that, we had the worst balance patch that has ever been put into the game of all time. I actually had a video about that where Herald had like 80% boon duration on quickness by spamming all of its abilities, and then Harbinger had it by existing with no gear. So they needed to learn, and they have gotten progressively better, in my opinion at least, over the past expansion, or 2 expansions really, End of Dragons and this. And they've been making more and more content that is more challenging, like strike missions. The Dagda CM is a meme, and then they made Ceres, which was much better. I think that they are capable of making a raid wing. That is the first point I want to make. Second, look at gear inspect. That's beginning to become a possibility because they have cosmetic inspect now, which until it got released, everyone would say was copium as well. They were like, "Oh, you're never going to be able to do that. They'll never let you do that ever." It's a thing in the game now. They've added a lot of quality of life features. Soon you'll be able to see. I think has it been put into the game yet, where you can see the squad message when you hover over the commander, or is that coming up?
When you hover over the commander, what happens? Oh, yeah,
like
I think that is
2 days.
that is coming up.
2 days, huh?
They're making a lot of quality of life improvements, and they're getting the game into a much more playable, stable state. They do need to fix LFG desperately, which they might. Who knows? But I think that they're at a place now where they could make a Raid 8 wing. And I think that the reason why they haven't done anything for End of Dragons, because remember, raids stopped in End of Dragons. And we didn't get any raids in Soto.
Path of Fire,
that was,
right?
Path of Fire was the last time we had them, and they stopped expansion-wise in End of Dragons.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
And that's when they refreshed the team, where they had a lot of new people coming on board. These people probably have enough experience now to confidently make a raid wing. Where before, because there's a lot of growing pains, they might have not had the skills, so they might have stuck to smaller scale content where like a strike boss or strike boss, where if something went wrong, they could easily fix it. I'm talking as a programmer, by the way. So like I'm not completely like out of the loop with how these kind of things work. I'm not a game programmer, but I know how code works.
I think
so.
Yeah, I'm not a programmer at all, so I can't speak to any of this. But what I do think is that they've learned a lot and they've made a lot of quality of life changes that puts them in a position to make better endgame content. Like an LCM type thing, another difficulty level, that makes endgame content way more worth it because they can make the normal mode really easy and nobody will care because there's an LCM. But in previously, it never felt like a good investment because you weren't making anyone happy. Someone was always going to be really, really pissed off. And maybe that's still the case, but it's a fewer, the demographics that are pissed off are less.
And also, maybe get away from just glorifying just the title.
One last thing, actually, because I had one more point to make. And I see, I respect the code, but I hate how people can't read company financial decisions. If they made a Raid Wing 8, it would absolutely revitalize the entire raiding scene.
Instantly, yep.
Yeah, and it would attract a lot of people back to the game. Saying that raids are back would make so many old players be like, holy crap, I need to go back and see what's going on over there. So that is a sound financial. It's become a meme for so long that when it actually happens, people will want to see what's going on. And it is probably good for advertising, just like Harvest Temple CM was. Okay, I'm sorry for interrupting. I just want to say that.
That's okay.
I know we're running out of time here, so I just want to say kind of last topic. Let you finish this, and then I've got one more topic after. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I just typed it out so I didn't forget. I think they should get away from focusing on just a title as a reward. Make the rewards more scalable. For example, like normal mode raid, 1 LI. Challenge mode, maybe 2. Something harder, maybe 3. Just an idea. It doesn't even have to be raid. Just in general, if they're going to increase levels of difficulty, make the rewards scalable to that, to where people can look at that and decide, okay, do I want to do this for 6 weeks and get it, or do I want to learn how to do it? Do I want to get better and do it on a harder difficulty and get it done in 2 or 3 weeks instead? I think that'd be cool.
Yeah. Okay, here it is. The last thing. If you could wish for any change for raids, for like the upcoming expansion, what would it be?
This might be outside of raids, but give me a matchmaking system, please. Like, I want to be able to get raid groups with, more efficiently than what we currently have to do, which is going outside the game.
I think you should just delete all of them. It's easier. No, I'm just kidding. Gex, what do you think?
I'm about to ruin my reputation forever. Well, first off, I think they should bring Raid Wings back. I also think, you know how they've done convergences?
Mm-hmm.
If they ever do any expansion involving water, you already know where I'm going. I think it would be super cool to fight a giant boss underwater and it be actually challenging. I think that would be a cool addition to the game, and I would not be opposed to there being a single raid boss and a single wing that has underwater combat. Maybe it could be
abort! Do not get any ideas, ArenaNet.
maybe it could be optional. There are raids and plenty of other MMOs where there's an optional boss.
No, I actually, in all seriousness, I've had a similar thought, but I would not emphasize underwater combat. I imagine this. Tell me if you would agree with this, Gex, because I think we have a similar vision. Imagine a platform, but at certain times it's like, oh, the chamber, there's too much pressure or something, and a number of people have to jump off the edge of the platform, dive underwater, and hit a button or something.
Yeah.
So that you're including that, but like at the same time, you're not having to really fight underwater. Because otherwise, underwater combat is just scuffed, right? Yeah. But otherwise, I think that's kind of cool. For me, I'm ready for them to just completely unleash and allow us to have more raid rewards. We've seen some interesting reward systems for World versus World implemented with like the weekly stuff. And it looks like they're doing a whole bunch of things with PvP, right? Like they added like the more achievements and stuff. And it sounds like they're going to bring back some tournaments or change the way the tournaments work. But they've just been silent on raids. People, I do not think that this is a coincidence. I really think that because they're being so silent about it, that there's going to be something in the next expansion. There's no way that that's not the case. I just so strongly believe it. And I think that they could add similar achievements and things for raids. So rather than needing KP, you could have like a thing that tallies, that shows off that you've killed the boss a certain number of times in the API. I think they could make it so that there's like a raid god kind of title, because all the other game modes have it. I think they could, do like weekly raid achievements so that it encourages people to just not just raid log, but to like keep doing instance content, or do specific CMs or something to like lead people into different content. I really think that, and I know it's extreme copium maybe, but look, yeah, clip it, people. I am going to be the first one to say that I believe that Wing 8 is possible. And I think that this next expansion, I've been on the record saying that I thought there was no hope for raids. I think all of these things are now funneling so that raids can have a resurgence, or if it's not raids, just more strike missions. So
because they tried alternatives and the alternatives just didn't have the impact they wanted. Maybe they'll go back to it.
I want to also like go over this super quick. ArenaNet has been still actively hiring people, and I've seen people on Twitter be like, "Come work with me if you want to work on something over at ArenaNet." And some people are like, "Oh, Guild Wars 3," but that's not going to be for like 10 years. And I think that they can absolutely make another wing. I think it is possible now. I think the people there have been seasoned enough. They've practiced. I think that they're ready to try something out like that. I think that because Soto was a new player expansion, as you said earlier, I think they need to make a Heart of Thorns-esque expansion next, where it is a little harder and there's a little more focus on difficult content.
Anyway, folks, I think that about wraps up this episode. We had a super good conversation. We will definitely do this again because this kind of raid ecosystem talk is a lot of fun. And, you know, we all have kind of this adjacent communities that are a lot of people kind of use all three of us. And I think that's kind of fun. Anyways, you want to just quickly give yourselves a quick shout out? We can start with Gix. You can say where do people find you? What do you do? That kind of thing.
I go in game by Gix. All my characters are Gix. I'm Jasper Onari on Twitch. I lead Excel. If you want to get new people into raids, this is a pretty good choice.
I'll keep it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna toss it over to you, man.
I'll keep it simple. Just read chat. I left a message. I'll probably be on here a lot, so I'm not going to talk about myself that much.
Sab.com.
Just follow that guy.
Yeah. And of course, you can find me at Snebzor on all the relevant things, I guess. And hopefully the people are excited. People listening, I want to just see the Twitch chat when I say this. This is going to be on Spotify. Yes, I've already made the Spotify account. I know how to do it. I'm going to put it on Spotify. That's actually what I'm going to do after stream today. I'm going to put episode 1, which happened yesterday, on Spotify. And then I'm going to have, I've done 3 episodes over the course of the last 2 days. So I have a bit of a backlog and I'll put them out every Sunday. So, or I'll have some episodes that aren't necessarily content specific, right? That I can hold on to and put when there's a gap week. So we will be on Spotify and we'll be on YouTube. Very exciting. And also right after this, I'm going to probably do a little bit of a after show, I suppose, or just kind of hang out and show off the title and chat with the stream. So we'll see you there. Anyway, thank you to my amazing guests and hosts and all of that. Thank you so much for being awesome, and have a super awesome one. We'll be right back, folks. Just give me like 5 minutes.